I think the main problem is our sense of how an economy works and what the good life means to some extent. We've built those two things together. The economy is something which is designed to grow and grow and grow, to accumulate. And it's built around an idea that that's what humans want. They want more and more stuff, and that having more and more stuff is the right way to achieve the good life. And to this sense of a good life that's about having more stuff and an economy that delivers more stuff is at the heart of almost all of the problems, because the underlying resources are scarce, because having all this stuff and processing it creates a lot of environmental damage, because we haven't anywhere been able to do that in a way that is socially equal, so that there are some who have all this stuff and some who have absolutely nothing, even the bare necessities of life, this huge inequalities. And ultimately, because the economy has to grow, this is its function, it's how it's been designed. And that has led to enormous instabilities. So that's a way of analysing what the problem is, but it's also a way of saying this is what we have to change. This economy built around the relentless accumulation and throughput of material things has to be rebuilt. We have to think again about what economic activity means, what it is for, what vision of the good life it serves, and how to organize it in ways that deliver quality of life to people.
Here I want to delve, and I apologize for this, a little bit into the dynamics, the system dynamics of how economies work, and in particular, how economies connect to us, to people. And it goes a little bit like this, that firms produce goods for us, for households, for people. And they also provide us with incomes, which is very useful because we can spend those incomes on more goods and services. Interestingly though, and this turns out to be an absolutely critical point, we don't spend all our money. And I've already alluded to the fact that in Germany, you're better at not spending your money than we are in the UK. The other thing we do is to put money into savings, and savings go into investments, and investments turn out to play an absolutely critical role in how economies work. In particular, we've used investments a lot in the last few decades to attempt to increase productivity. In particular, we increase labor productivity, so we can do more things this year with the same workforce that we had last year, which is great because it means everything is becoming more productive. We're producing more goods and services with the same number of people. But the trouble is, if that productivity grows, it also means that if we don't grow the economy, then somebody finds themselves out of work. Labor productivity, it's called in the jargon of economics. And it lures us, it lures economics forwards. It tells us that the world is getting more efficient. It reduces the costs of the things that we have to buy, and simultaneously it drives people out of work. If we can't grow the economy faster and faster, in the face of labor productivity, we are always looking at more and more people out of work. It's a split dynamics. It's a double-edged sword. It's actually, at the heart of it, a kind of fetish of enormous proportions. Economists simply still do not get the continual pursuit of labor productivity robs work of its meaning. It robs human labor of the services that we share, and it robs our economy of the ability to be stable without endlessly growing. So, in a sense, where we find ourselves is caught in a trap, a kind of dilemma. The dilemma is this, that growth is unsustainable. At least the growth that we've had in the long term is totally unsustainable. And yet degrowth, the opposite of growth, is unstable, risks being unstable in our existing system. And I think one of the things that I would like to make very clear to you is that this is a profound dilemma. It's not a dilemma where we have any sense of comfort, either from easy ecological solutions ready off the peg to be plugged into our existing system, nor indeed from within the system itself. The ecological challenges, the financial challenges, the economic challenges, the social challenges of this dilemma are huge, and they are, to my mind, one of the most important questions, perhaps the most important question of our times.
My fundamental principles for a post-growth economy are actually quite simple. There's broadly two of them. And interestingly, there isn't a principle which says what we do is stop growth. That it's not a policy prescription, it's not an aspirational goal, it's not even a part of the economics. Actually, what we do is we set aside the question of growth and we concentrate on two basic strategies. And one of those strategies around investment. Investment already exists in the modern economy, but we have to rethink investment. And I can say a little bit more about how we do that.
These kinds of investments don't show the financial returns that are expected in the conventional financial markets. And so we will need to reform those markets. We will need investment markets that measure social and ecological returns. We'll need financial markets that don't take risks at the cost of the public purse. We'll need a sense of ethical investment to be built into our framework for the capital markets. And we will need that investment sometimes actually not to show the financial returns that they've become associated with. This investment is investment in the long-term ecological and social assets on which we depend.
The second strategy is to create economies in which our economic activities are based around delivering the services that we need for human beings to thrive. And again, there's a lot more to be said about that, what those services are. They are around health, around education, around community care, around the regeneration of our buildings, our parks, our green spaces. They're around the creation of leisure industries in which people can improve the quality of their lives. They're around cultural industries that add enjoyment to the way that we act in a community together. And here is a set of activities, economic activities, which are light in terms of carbon and material use, or can be made relatively light in terms of carbon, which are employment rich. It means they employ people, and it is in fact, it's because of the human labor that provides the service that we value these services in the first place.
It turns out that when a doctor sees a patient, the value of that relationship is in the contact between the doctor and their patient. It turns out that when teachers teach in schools, it doesn't make the quality of the teaching better when they have ever bigger class sizes. It turns out that when the Berlin Philharmonic plays one of Beethoven's symphonies, it doesn't make it better if they expand the size of the orchestra. It turns out that actually growth doesn't make so much sense. Productivity growth doesn't make so much sense in these enterprises which contribute genuinely to the quality of our lives.
Having the vision, of course, is just a starting point, really. And the key questions are how we move towards that vision. And I think that there are three broad tasks. One is actually to establish the limits, the ecological limits under which economies must operate. And we've begun to do that in relation to carbon and climate change. We must also do it in relation to scarce resources, to our impacts on biodiversity, our use of land, our impact on clean water, on fish stocks, on forests and habitats. And we must build that into the way that our economics works. And the second key task is around the economics itself. And there's no doubt, really, that we do not have, at the moment, an economics fit for purpose, because it's an economics built explicitly around endless consumption growth. And then the third task is around the social logic of our societies. We need to change this social logic of consumerism. We need to recognize, actually, that we've built that social logic deliberately in order to keep our economies going. But once we recognize that, we need to begin to dismantle it.
People actually are not the kinds of human beings, the kinds of species that economists often see them as. We're not entirely those novelty-seeking individual consumers. We don't always have voracious appetites for stuff. Sure, we think about ourselves sometimes, but as the best social psychology tells you, actually that selfish instinct, even if it is laid down by evolution, has always been countered by an altruistic instinct, by a regard for others. Our selfish behaviors always balanced against other regarding behaviors. Our novelty-seeking behaviors, again, adaptive in evolutionary terms, always balanced against a concern for tradition, for stability, for conservation.
I would say that there are 2 or 3 things that at the moment stand in the way of this kind of change. One of them is obvious. It's the vested interests of the people who are profiting from a system that is unjust, that is environmentally degrading, and that is socially divisive. And I think it's become clearer in the wake of the financial crisis that this dynamic of power is an important impediment to change. It's a difficult one to address. The second obstacle, I think, is that the system itself, even as it supports this power dynamic, still relies on it continuing, because our economics is built around consumption growth as the default mechanism of stability, which is why this task is so important, to devise an economics, to devise economic strategies which no longer rely on continual consumption growth. But there's still a role for individuals here, and I think this role's become clearer recently, and it is actually to make the voice for change heard. It is to actually say loudly, as if necessary, that the system that we had before is not just dangerous in terms of the environmental impact, it's not just unstable in economic terms, it is deeply unjust. And the kind of protest that we have begun to see recently, most noticeably, I suppose, in the Occupy protests, is exactly this kind of action. It is individual action. It is the action of quite a small number of people, but it is about making this voice heard, the need for change. And it's a form of social activism, it's a form of political activism that actually begins to give legitimacy to governments to change these underlying structures. And it's a form of individual action that allows you to say in the world, not just I'm doing my bit in terms of recycling or insulating your home, but actually I am making my voice heard and expressing my desire for a better society.